From his front window, Frank watched as his neighbor, Jamie, strode up the walkway to his house, keys jingling in his hand. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over his toned figure, the casual ease of his movements stirring something deep in Frank's chest. He took a moment to appreciate the sight before stepping outside, leaning against his doorframe with a smirk playing at his lips. "Hey, buddy, what's up?" Frank called out, his voice carrying an easy confidence. Jamie turned at the sound, his brows lifting slightly in curiosity. "Not gonna lie, you look like you're just begging for some company." Jamie chuckled, running a hand through his tousled brown hair. "Oh yeah? You think so?" Frank shrugged, his smirk widening. "Well, I'm actually about to tackle a little project inside. Could use a hand if you're not too busy. It's nothing crazy, just some tight spaces I need help with." Jamie arched a brow, clearly amused but intrigued. "Tight spaces, huh?" Frank chuckled. "Exactly. Some places are just easier to get into with two sets of hands." There was a brief pause, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Jamie considered the offer for a moment, before stuffing his keys into his pocket and stepping closer. "All right, Frank, let's see what you've got." Frank grinned, pushing his door open wider. "Attaboy." As Jamie stepped inside, Frank followed, the smirk never leaving his face. He had a feeling this little project was about to become a lot more interesting. The air inside Frank's house was warm, filled with the scent of wood polish and something faintly spicy, like cinnamon. Jamie glanced around, noting the cozy but lived-in feel of the space. "So, what exactly are we working on?" he asked, turning back to Frank. Frank gestured toward the hallway. "Hall closet's got some shelves that need fixing up, but fair warning, space is a little tight in there." Jamie smirked. "I think I can handle it." They moved toward the closet, Frank stepping in first. He reached up, pretending to inspect the shelves, but he was all too aware of Jamie's presence behind him. The space was indeed cramped, and when Jamie stepped in after him, their shoulders nearly brushed. "You weren't kidding," Jamie murmured, his breath warm against Frank's ear. "Pretty tight fit." Frank turned his head slightly, eyes locking with Jamie's. "Told you." For a moment, the project was forgotten. The charged air between them was impossible to ignore. Frank swallowed hard, his usual smirk softening into something more genuine. "You ever done much handiwork before?" he asked, voice lower now. Jamie leaned in just a fraction. "Depends on what kind of handiwork we're talking about." Frank let out a low chuckle, tilting his head slightly. "The kind that takes patience and a steady hand." Jamie's lips quirked into a grin. "Oh, I've got plenty of patience." Frank swallowed, feeling the heat between them intensify. His fingers brushed against the wooden shelf, but his focus was entirely on Jamie now. "Guess we'll find out," he murmured. Jamie's gaze flicked down to Frank's lips for just a moment before he reached past him, fingers grazing Frank's hand as he grabbed a screwdriver from the small tool bag on the floor. "Better get to work then," he said, voice playful but thick with meaning. Frank exhaled, nodding slightly. "Yeah, better get to it." Jamie worked on securing the shelves, his hands steady as he twisted the screwdriver. Frank stood close, watching, his gaze flickering between Jamie's focused expression and the curve of his lips. "You're good at this," Frank admitted, leaning against the door frame. Jamie glanced at him with a smirk. "Told you I had a steady hand." Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "I guess I underestimated you." Jamie finished tightening the last screw and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Well, shelves are fixed, but—" He looked up, eyes locking onto Frank's. "I wouldn't mind sticking around a little longer." Frank's breath hitched slightly, but he recovered quickly, stepping closer. "Yeah, Jamie nodded, a slow smile playing at his lips. Yeah. Frank reached out, fingers lightly brushing Jamie's arm. Then stay. Jamie didn't hesitate. He closed the space between them, their bodies now inches apart. Frank could feel the warmth radiating from Jamie, the tension finally snapping as Jamie leaned in, capturing Frank's lips in a slow, deliberate kiss. Frank melted into it, hands sliding up to grip Jamie's waist. The shelves were forgotten. The only thing that mattered now was the taste of Jamie, the way their bodies fit together so perfectly. When they finally pulled apart, Jamie grinned. So, what's the next project? Frank smirked. Oh, I can think of a few things. And just like that, the afternoon took an entirely different turn. Hours later, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the windows, Frank and Jamie sat side by side on the couch, legs stretched out, a pair of cold beers in their hands. The air between them was lighter now, the earlier tension replaced with something warm and unspoken. Jamie took a sip of his drink, glancing over at Frank. So, is this how you get all your neighbors to help with projects? Frank laughed, shaking his head. Nah, just the ones I really like. Jamie smirked, setting his beer down before turning toward Frank. Lucky me. Frank studied him for a moment, then reached over, brushing a thumb against Jamie's jaw. Yeah, he murmured, voice softer now. Lucky me. Jamie leaned in again, this time with a slower, surer kiss, his hand resting lightly on Frank's chest. Later that night, as the stars blinked above the quiet neighborhood, Jamie found himself lingering at Frank's doorstep, not quite ready to leave. Frank leaned against the doorframe, mirroring the stance he'd taken earlier that afternoon. But this time, his smirk was softer, more genuine. You could stay, Frank suggested, his voice low. Jamie exhaled, his fingers brushing the doorframe as he considered it. Then, with a quiet smile, he stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. As the hours passed, they found themselves tangled together on the couch, lost in quiet conversation and easy laughter. Frank traced absent-minded patterns along Jamie's arm, enjoying the simple intimacy of the moment. Jamie shifted closer, resting his head against Frank's shoulder. I think I like this project the best, he murmured, voice drowsy but content. Frank chuckled, pressing a kiss to Jamie's temple. Yeah, no complaints here. They stayed like that, wrapped up in each other as the night deepened. Neither of them felt the need to rush anything. After all, some things were worth taking their time with.